Many people live exhausted not because they are lazy, but because they have been trying to finance a divine calling with human strength. You have been trying to supply what only God was meant to supply. You have been trying to sustain a life that was designed to be sustained by heaven. And that is why you have felt drained, frustrated, confused, and overwhelmed. God never intended for you to live by survival. God intended for you to live by supply. There is a difference between chasing provision and walking in provision. There is a difference between hoping for enough and knowing the source is unlimited. Today, that difference must become clear in your spirit. God is not funding your life because you are perfect. God is not funding your life because you never failed. God is funding your life because purpose demands provision. When God gives an assignment, God also releases the resources needed to fulfill it. When God places a vision in your heart, God already accounted for every expense attached to that vision. Nothing about your life caught God by surprise. Not your delays, not your mistakes, not your weaknesses. God knew what it would cost to bring you where you are now, and God still said yes to you. That alone should shift the way you see yourself. You must understand this truth deeply. If God is the one who called you, then God is responsible for sustaining you. You were never meant to beg your way through destiny. You were never meant to shrink your dreams to match your bank account. You were never meant to measure your future by your current resources. God does not fund lives based on human logic. God funds lives based on divine intention. When intention is clear, provision follows. When purpose is established, supply is released. The problem is not that God is unwilling. The problem is that many people are still living as if they are the source. Look at how much pressure you have been carrying. Look at how much fear has been sitting on your chest at night. Look at how many decisions you delayed because you are waiting for money, approval, or certainty. That waiting season ends when you recognize who is funding your life. When God funds your life, obedience comes before evidence. Movement comes before comfort. Faith comes before clarity. God does not reveal the full account balance of heaven. God reveals the next step and waits for your trust. And when you step, supply meets you in motion. Some of you have been asking God for provision, but God has been waiting for alignment. Because provision does not flow where purpose is resisted. God funds obedience. God funds surrender. God funds movement. As long as you are holding back, calculating every risk and trying to stay in control, you are blocking the flow of what God already released. God does not partner with fear. God partners with faith. The moment you stop asking, how will I survive? And start declaring, God is my source, something shifts in the unseen realm. You need to hear this clearly. God does not fund anxiety. God does not fund doubt. God does not fund double-minded living. God funds trust. God funds courage. God funds obedience that moves even when the path is unclear. That is why some people with very little appear to walk in peace, while others with much are constantly stressed. The difference is not money. The difference is source. When your source is God, peace becomes your evidence before provision becomes visible. God is not asking you to understand everything. God is asking you to trust completely. Trust is the currency that unlocks divine funding, not effort, not stress, not overthinking. Trust, when you trust God, you stop living defensively. You stop hoarding energy. You stop making fear-based decisions. You begin to live from overflow instead of survival. And that is where real transformation begins. Some of you have been living as if God is optional in your finances, optional in your decisions, optional in your future plans. But God does not sponsor part-time faith. God responds to full dependence. When you fully depend on God, you stop chasing money and start attracting alignment. You stop forcing doors and start walking through doors that open effortlessly. That does not mean there will be no challenges. It means challenges no longer define your direction. Understand this: when God funds your life, delays are not denials. Closed doors are not rejection. Waiting seasons are not punishment. Everything becomes strategic. Everything becomes intentional. God is not wasting your time. God is building your capacity. Because the level of provision you receive must match the level of responsibility you can handle. God does not release overflow to a mindset that would collapse under it. That is why God has been working on your thinking before changing your circumstances. God has been stretching your faith before expanding your territory. God has been strengthening your character before increasing your influence. Because funding is not just about money. Funding is about stability. Funding is about wisdom. Funding is about endurance. God is not just financing your needs. God is financing your growth. Some of you are afraid that if you fully trust God, you will lose control. Let me tell you the truth: you are never in control. You are only stressed. Real security begins when you stop pretending you are the provider. Real rest begins when you acknowledge that God is more invested in your future than you could ever be. God does not abandon what God funds. God does not neglect what God calls. God does not run out of resources. God does not miscalculate. From this moment forward, you must stop speaking the language of lack. Your words reveal your source. When you constantly say, I can't, I don't have enough, it's not possible, you are declaring a limited source. But when you say, God is with me, God will provide, God will make a way, you are aligning your speech with heaven's economy. Words are not empty. Words set direction. Words release faith or reinforce fear. God is not asking you to deny reality. God is asking you to define reality through faith. Faith does not ignore facts. Faith places facts under divine authority. When God is funding your life, facts do not intimidate you. Numbers do not scare you. Delays do not weaken. You learn to stand firm because your confidence is no longer in what you see, but in who stands behind you. There are people listening right now who have been on the edge of giving up. You were tired of trying, tired of believing, tired of hoping. But hear this: the reason you are still here is because God has not withdrawn support. The reason you have not collapsed is because divine funding has been quietly sustaining you even when you are unaware. God carried you through moments you did not think you would survive. God protected you from outcomes you never saw. God provided in ways you never acknowledged. And now God is calling you to recognize the source consciously, not accidentally. This is not a season to play small. This is not a season to retreat. This is not a season to live cautiously. This is a season to move with conviction. When God funds your life, boldness becomes natural. Obedience becomes urgent. Faith becomes practical. You stop waiting for perfect conditions and start creating momentum through trust. God does not need ideal circumstances. God needs willing hearts. Some of you have been praying for financial breakthrough, but God is offering mindset breakthrough first. Because if your thinking does not change, more resources will only amplify your fear. God wants you free, not just funded. God wants you secure, not just supplied. God wants you confident, not just comfortable. That is why God is teaching you to rely on presence before provision, on trust before abundance, on faith before evidence. From now on, every step you take must come from this foundation: God is my source. Not people, not systems, not circumstances. God. When people help you, God sent them. When doors open, God opened them. When opportunities appear, God arranged them. And when things fall apart, God is still in control. Nothing in your life is random when God is funding it. You are not late, you are not behind, you are not forgotten, you are being prepared. And preparation always feels uncomfortable before it becomes powerful. God is stripping away false dependencies so you can stand firmly on the one source that never fails. God is removing what you leaned on so you can discover what truly sustains you. Let this truth settle in your spirit. You are not walking alone into the future. You are not guessing your way forward. You are not hoping something works out. You are moving under divine backing. Every step taken in faith is met with supply. Every act of obedience is supported by heaven. Every risk taken in trust is covered by God's faithfulness. And as this understanding deepens, fear will loosen its grip. Anxiety will lose its authority, and hesitation will no longer control your decisions, because when God is funding your life, you no longer live asking, what if it fails? You live declaring, even if it shakes, God sustains, and you move forward knowing that the same power that called you is the same power that carries you into what comes next, shaping your confidence, refining your trust, and expanding your capacity as you step into a level of faith where dependence becomes your strength and surrender becomes your advantage. Because when the source is eternal, the supply does not end, and the journey you are walking is only beginning to reveal how deeply supported you have been all along. Because when God becomes the source, your life is no longer reactive. It becomes intentional. You stop waking up wondering what will go wrong and start waking up anchored in the certainty that whatever comes, God has already accounted for it. There is a confidence that rises in a person who knows they are divinely funded. It is not arrogance. It is not pride. It is quiet strength. It is stability in uncertainty. It is the calm of someone who knows that even if the ground shifts, the foundation remains unshaken, because God does not build on fragile ground. Many people misunderstand divine funding because they think it means instant abundance without process. But God is not careless with supply. God is precise. God releases provision in seasons, in measures, and in wisdom. What feels like not enough is often training. What feels like delay is often protection. God does not rush you into overflow if your mind is still shaped by fear. God first rewires your thinking so that when increase comes, it does not own you. God is not interested in giving you more if more will pull you away from dependence. God always prioritizes relationship over resources. You must realize that when God funds your life, scarcity thinking must die. Scarcity is not about how much you have, it is about how you think. You can have access and still live afraid. You can have opportunity and still feel insecure. God is dismantling that mindset. God is teaching you to live from trust, not from panic. Panic comes from believing you are alone. Trust comes from knowing God is involved in every detail. There are moments when God will intentionally reduce your options, so you learn to rely on presence instead of possibilities. When options disappear, faith appears. When control fades, trust deepens. God does not remove safety nets to make you fall. God removes them so you learn to fly. Divine funding is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like discipline. Sometimes it looks like being held back so you are not destroyed by what you are not ready to carry. You have to understand that God's economy does not respond to desperation. It responds to alignment. When your heart intentions and actions align with God's will, supply flows naturally, not forcefully, not anxiously, naturally. That is why peace becomes your greatest sign that you are on the right path. When you are aligned, even challenges feel purposeful. Even obstacles feel instructive. Nothing feels wasted. Some of you have been trying to impress people so they will support you, validate you, or invest in you. But God is shifting your focus. God is saying, stop looking horizontally for what comes vertically. People are not your source. They are instruments, and instruments change. God does not. When you remove people from the position of provider and place God there, relationships become healthier, expectations become lighter, and disappointment loses its power over you. When God funds your life, rejection stops being personal. Closed doors stop feeling like failure. Missed opportunities stop haunting you. You learn to trust divine redirection. God does not take you backwards. God only repositions you forward. What you thought you lost was often what would have limited you. God removes what cannot go where you are going. That removal is not punishment, it is preparation. This is why comparison is dangerous. When you compare your journey to someone else's, you forget that God funds differently based on assignment. God does not give everyone the same path because not everyone carries the same purpose. Your timeline is not delayed, it is tailored. Your process is not flawed, it is specific. God is not slow, God is intentional. You need to stop interpreting struggle as abandonment. Some of the strongest faith is built in seasons where supply seems quiet, but presence is strong. God is closest when you are being refined. God is shaping your endurance. God is training your discernment. God is strengthening your spiritual muscles so that when visible provision increases, invisible stability is already in place. Divine funding also means God protects you from things you asked for but were not ready to manage. Sometimes what feels like unanswered prayer is actually answered wisdom. God sees outcomes you cannot. God sees consequences you are unaware of. God does not give blindly. God gives wisely, and wisdom often looks like restraint before release. As you grow in this understanding, you will notice a shift in how you pray. You stop begging and start aligning. You stop pleading and start declaring. You stop focusing on what you lack and start thanking God for what is unfolding. Gratitude unlocks awareness. When you become aware of what God is already doing, your faith becomes stronger and your fear becomes smaller. There is also a responsibility that comes with being divinely funded. God does not supply so you can live selfishly. God supplies so you can live purposefully. Provision is tied to impact. When God increases your capacity, it is because God intends to increase your influence. That influence may be quiet or public, visible or unseen, but it always matters. God funds lives that pour out, not lives that hoard. You are entering a season where obedience will require courage. God may ask you to move when it feels uncomfortable. God may ask you to release what feels secure. God may ask you to trust when logic disagrees. But remember this, God never withdraws funding from obedience. When God instructs, God supplies. When God leads, God sustains. The risk is never in obedience. The risk is in hesitation. Fear often disguises itself as wisdom, but wisdom is calm. Fear is loud. When you sense urgency without peace, pause. God's direction does not create panic. God's direction creates clarity, even if the outcome is not fully visible. Learn to recognize the voice that calms you, not the voice that pressures you. Divine guidance carries assurance, not confusion. You are not meant to live calculating every step as if one mistake will destroy you. God's grace covers growth. God's mercy allows learning. God is not waiting for perfection. God is walking with you through process. That is why you can move forward without fear of failure. Failure is not final when God is the source. It becomes instruction, not condemnation. As this truth settles deeper, your identity will change. You will no longer define yourself by what you lack, but by who backs you. You will no longer introduce yourself with insecurity, but with quiet authority. Authority does not shout. Authority knows. And when you know God is funding your life, you walk differently, you speak differently, you decide differently. You will begin to notice that opportunities start aligning without force. See, conversations open doors, ideas flow with clarity, creativity increases. This is not coincidence. This is what happens when you are in rhythm with divine supply. When God funds your life, your inner world becomes ordered before your outer world expands. Even in moments of uncertainty, you will find yourself steady. Even when plans shift, you will not collapse, because stability no longer comes from predictability. It comes from trust. God is teaching you to live rooted, not rigid, flexible, not fearful, expectant, not anxious. And when challenges arise, you will not ask, why is this happening to me? You will ask, what is God building in me? That shift alone transforms your experience. Problems stop being enemies and start becoming tools. Tools in the hands of a wise God who knows exactly how much pressure you can handle and exactly when to release relief. You are not invisible. You are not overlooked. You are not forgotten. God sees you. God knows your needs. God understands your concerns. And God is far more invested in your future than you have ever been. The funding of your life did not begin when you realized it. It began when God called you. You are simply awakening to a truth that has always been active. From this point forward, let your faith rise above your fear. Let your trust outgrow your doubts. Let your obedience speak louder than your hesitation. Because when God is the source, your life becomes a testimony not of struggle, but of sustenance, not of survival, but of purpose, not of fear, but of faith. Moving steadily forward as you learn to walk with confidence in the unseen support that carries you step by step, season by season, into everything God has prepared, revealing more strength, more clarity, and more assurance with every act of trust as the journey continues to unfold under divine care and unfailing provision. Because divine funding does not merely change what you have, it transforms who you become. When God funds your life, your inner posture shifts from fear-driven reaction to faith-led intention. You no longer move because you are threatened by lack. You move because you are compelled by purpose. Purpose gives you stamina. Purpose gives you clarity. Purpose gives you the ability to endure seasons that would have crushed you if you were living only for comfort. God never funds comfort alone. God funds calling. There is a discipline God develops in those whose lives are divinely supported. It is the discipline of listening before acting, waiting before rushing, and trusting before seeing. This discipline does not weaken you, it sharpens you. You learn the difference between impulse and instruction. Impulse drains you, instruction directs you. God does not hurry you because haste often disconnects people from wisdom. When God funds your life, timing becomes as important as movement. Many people think faith means acting quickly, but true faith means acting correctly. God's voice brings alignment, not anxiety. When you are aligned, you do not need to force outcomes. Outcomes arrive as a result of obedience. God does not require you to manipulate situations to survive. God requires you to stay faithful to direction. Direction carries provision within it. You must also understand that divine funding trains you to steward well. God does not pour into careless hands. God pours into faithful hearts. Stewardship is not about how much you manage. It is about how responsibly you handle what you already have. God watches how you treat small assignments, quiet responsibilities, unseen moments. Funding increases where faithfulness is proven. God trusts those who honor what is placed before them. This is why integrity matters even when no one is watching. Integrity is a form of worship. When you act with honesty, humility, and restraint, you align yourself with divine order. God does not fund compromise. God funds conviction. Conviction anchors you when pressure rises. Pressure does not break a grounded person, it reveals what they are rooted in. There will be moments when God's funding looks like endurance rather than escape. You may expect deliverance, but God may choose development. Development lasts longer than rescue. Rescue removes the problem, development transforms the person. God is more concerned with who you become than what you avoid. When God strengthens you internally, external obstacles lose their power to define you. You are learning to trust not only God's ability, but God's character. Ability answers, can God? Character answers, will God remain faithful? And the answer is consistent. God does not abandon purpose halfway. God does not revoke support in the middle of process. God finishes what God begins. Your confidence should not be in how strong you feel, but in how faithful God is. As this truth deepens, patience will grow. Patience is not passive waiting, it is active trust. It is the confidence that God is working even when progress feels slow. When God funds your life, silence does not mean absence. Silence often means God is arranging details beyond your awareness. Not everything needs to be explained to be effective. Some seasons require you to stand firm rather than move fast. Standing firm is not stagnation. It is resistance against fear. It is refusing to retreat when circumstances try to intimidate you. God gives strength not only to advance, but to remain steady. Stability is powerful. A stable heart hears clearly. A stable mind discerns wisely. A stable spirit does not panic when tested. You are also being taught discernment. Not every opportunity is an assignment. Not every open door is from God. Divine funding includes divine filtering. God protects you from distractions that look promising but lead nowhere. When you are aligned with God, you gain the courage to say no without guilt and yes without fear. Discernment preserves energy for what truly matters. There will be moments when others do not understand your choices. That is not your burden. Obedience often looks strange to those who do not hear the instruction. You are not required to explain what God has not revealed to them. You are required to trust what God has revealed to you. Approval is not a prerequisite for provision. God's affirmation is enough. As you continue forward, humility will become your safeguard. Humility keeps you teachable. Humility keeps you grounded. Humility reminds you that the source is greater than the vessel. God resists pride not because God is harsh, but because pride disconnects people from dependence. Dependence is where supply flows freely. You will also discover that divine funding brings contentment before increase. Contentment does not kill ambition, it purifies it. When you are content, you're no longer driven by envy or comparison. You are driven by assignment. You move at your pace, in your lane, with your focus intact. God does not rush the content, God expands them. There is a peace that settles in those who truly trust God as their source. It is not the absence of challenges, it is the presence of assurance. Assurance that whatever arises, you will not be abandoned to figure it out alone. God walks ahead, beside, and within you. That awareness changes how you face uncertainty. You begin to realize that provision is not always material first. Sometimes it is wisdom, sometimes it is strength, sometimes it is clarity, sometimes it is restraint. God gives what is needed for the moment, not what satisfies impatience. When you receive what you need at the right time, you remain balanced. God values balance because imbalance destroys even good gifts. As your faith matures, gratitude will become natural. Gratitude shifts your focus from what is missing to what is active. When you recognize how consistently God has sustained you, trust deepens. Gratitude multiplies awareness. Awareness fuels faith. Faith invites more alignment. Alignment attracts provision. You are not meant to carry tomorrow's weight today. God releases grace daily. When you try to solve everything at once, you exhaust yourself unnecessarily. God invites you to live present, not pressured. Present obedience unlocks future supply. Today's faith opens tomorrow's doors. There will be moments when God asks you to step forward before certainty arrives. Certainty often follows obedience, not precedes it. If you wait until everything makes sense, you may miss the moment God prepared. Faith is not blind, it is responsive. It responds to direction, not comfort. Remember this deeply. Your worth is not measured by productivity, success, or visibility. Your worth is established by God's intention. Divine funding is not a reward for performance. It is a provision for purpose. You are supported because you are called, not because you are flawless. As you continue this journey, your confidence will no longer depend on outcomes. It will depend on alignment. Even when outcomes change, alignment remains. That is why you can move forward without fear of collapse. When God is your source, even setbacks serve purpose. And so you keep walking, not rushed, not hesitant, but anchored in trust, learning to rest in the assurance that your steps are ordered, your needs are known, your future is considered, and your life is unfolding under a divine system that does not fail. As faith continues to mature, vision continues to sharpen, and dependence continues to deepen, carrying you forward into greater understanding, greater strength, and greater confidence in the unseen support that surrounds you.